Welcome to Neutral Podcast, where we discuss paving the way to a regenerative tomorrow. I'm Nate Helbach, your host, founder, and CEO of Neutral, a regenerative real estate development company. Join us each week as we host world-renowned guests and explore the dynamic landscapes of real estate development, alternative investing, sustainability, forestry, urbanism, and design. Learning how to make places for people. Welcome back to Neutral Podcast. Today we're joined by Jennifer Castenson, who brings unique insights from her intersection of real estate innovation and construction technology. As a Forbes contributor focused on real estate trends and through her work at Build X Act, Jennifer tracks the cutting edge technologies and solutions reshaping how we build and remodel homes. Her expertise spans the full spectrum of residential construction, from breaking through building materials to software solutions that are making housing more affordable, sustainable, and resilient. If we could maybe just kick it off with a little bit of a background of your personal and professional career, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. I'm very excited to be here, and I love what Neutral's doing. So great effort and glad to support it. So personally and professionally, I grew up wanting to be a journalist and, dreaming about being maybe like National Geographic and traveling the world, and which I've been able to do. And when I traveled the world, I, one thing that you can't escape is looking at the landscape and the housing that's provided. And so fortunately, I fell into a role when I lived in Dallas, Texas, with Hillwood Development. And they were obviously doing a lot of development projects across retail, commercial, and residential and industrial. And since then, I've been in the construction and housing sector and worked for a building products manufacturer and with the media group Zonda, and now with Build Exact, a construction project management software. And one thing, it's just is very profound and just really, to me, is very important about what I'm doing and why I enjoy this space is because of the importance of housing. Nate, how do you define home? What is a home to you?
A place where you live for the most part, but it's so much more than that for us. I think that's one thing that a lot of people look at it as, hey, this is just a shelter for my head to sleep under, right, and cook food under. But I think at Neutral, how we're trying to redefine home is really looking holistically at how does the home actually affect the things that you do on a daily basis, but also how your body actually functions. It's like, can you have access to better air, better water? One thing we're just starting to do is add health clinics into each of our buildings. So we're trying to more broadly define how home actually relates to really your holistic well-being instead of just a shelter for you to put your head to rest.
Yeah, absolutely. And that your answer, which is awesome, but it's very academic, right? And it's also, you took some of the tangibles and intangibles, but when you ask somebody else that, if I just grab somebody off the street and I ask them what a home is, they're going to stumble with it a little bit. Sometimes you just can't put it into words. You can't put in the significance of what a home means to you, because not only is it for you personally, for your shelter and safety and health and wellness and security, and it's your future, it's your promise, right? It's all of these things in a structure, but at the same time, it is where you go to spend time with the people that you love the most. Not only that, it provides those things for the people that you love the most. So you're taking all of this and putting it into one word, and we as an industry are trying to provide that for people. And we get lost in just the hammers and nails and wood of the discussion and not in those intangibles that I was talking about. And then we also get lost in the fact that those things have a cost to them. And for me, and being in this industry, I have a lot of passion for trying to find what it is that people need in a home and helping to highlight the folks who are trying to deliver that, the innovators in the space who are looking at the unique solutions to make home a reality for more people and making everyone more secure and safe and healthy. And so that's my background in a nutshell and why I'm so passionate about this.
Yeah, that's really interesting. How do you think like people should answer that question, or what would be the ideal outcome of what is a home?
Yeah, that's a so um I think everyone's going to have kind of a unique response to that. And they kind of should, right? Because it's not a home really shouldn't be a one size fits all. But one thing that I feel like is a little bit unique to me is that I moved around a lot growing up. So I don't have, I think a lot of my friends have the home that they go back to and visit in the holidays that they grew up in, right? I don't have that. And so for me, home is mostly where I meet my loved ones. And so I can feel at home most, generically speaking, I can feel at home regardless of, what the structure is, just when those people are around me. So, and there are certain cities that have a little, a spot in my heart and things like that. But I think people defining what the home is, what I would like us to achieve for people is them to be able to live in a place that feels safe and secure and that they're not worried about losing and where they can actually feel like they're providing for their families. And so many people, and more all the time, don't have that as a reality. So to me, that's like crazy heartbreaking. And I can sit here and define it in these terms, and other people are only trying to come up with the money to do something to be able to afford a place to live where I have the luxury of not having to worry about that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I don't think I've looked at it kind of through that lens before, because we're always like so much in the weeds of how do we actually get this thing built, um, and not as much about like, yeah, what does home security look like, right? Like, how do we make sure people don't feel like they're going to lose this home next month or next year? So that should be something maybe we do a little bit more exploration into. One thing I wanted to touch on in our first segment was really looking at this idea of zero carbon aligned housing. And I know recently you wrote a paper about it, which we're going to link in the show notes for those who want to look at any of Jennifer's wonderful written pieces. We'll have it in our show notes so you can go look through all of it. But one thing I just wanted you to maybe give us a little bit of background on is there's been this big push, especially since the Inflation Reduction Act has been passed, of really trying to get zero carbon ready. And I know there's a huge amount of houses that need to get zero carbon ready. And so what have you seen in this new report that was issued, that we need to do by 2050 for us to be able to have a lot of zero carbon aligned housing?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I just want to set the score. So I Build Exact and I worked with the ABC Collaborative. ABC Collaborative stands for Advanced Building Construction Collaborative. It is a collaborative of the United States Department of Energy and the national labs, and then other private and public entities who are members of the collaborative. Build Exact is a member. And working with them, I did write a piece on Forbes.com that talked about the release of this report, which actually has 30 years of data feeding it to better inform the industry how to arrive at zero carbon alignment. So they created that terminology to put everybody on the same page, and then also to achieve 2050 goals of zero carbon. But what will it take is going to take creativity. It's going to take massive collaboration across all sectors of the industry. So it's going to have to, land developers, architects, builders, policymakers, all are going to have to hold hands to agree on achieving these goals and then come up with solutions to do that. Manufacturers have to be in there doing the right R&D and coming out with new products. The products that we have in place today and that we're using on a regular basis are not going to be sustainable in this type of market, in a zero carbon aligned market. We're going to have to look at modular solutions more so, things that we can build in a factory. We're going to have to look at infill projects. We're going to have to look at higher density. Not only because we don't have enough land in cities, but we're going to have to look at land that isn't threatened by climate events. We're going to have to look at not only building the structures, but making sure that they're sustainable right now. And I know I saw this recently, but right now we build things to last like 25, 30 years. We can't do that anymore. We have to look at how buildings can be repurposed on a regular basis. Right now, we're trying to convert offices. The offices are hard to convert, but if we're thinking about that when we first build them and we know that they need to be flexible in the future, we're going to be thinking about design in a different way. So there are so many unique and innovative companies that are out there trying to figure this out. They're much smarter than I am, and they're using robotics and different materials, and they're being biophilic design. That's what I'm super excited about. And that is what I try to share out through Forbes and try to highlight so that people can understand what these groups are doing, and then also so that they can scale up. So I think it's super important that we put a spotlight on some of those smaller groups so that they can get the investment and the support and resources that they need to advance.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I mean, to some, I think it seems like this insurmountable task to build 28 million homes by 2050. Because that sounds like a ton of building. But how do you think we actually achieve that? I mean, like, it's not like we don't need the homes, right? It's not like these homes are just going to sit empty. Like, we have the demand from the population of people that need to live in these homes. And so we have to figure out a way to build them. But how do you think we do that in a way that meets the zero carbon aligned housing? Because it seems to me like it would be easy to go say, hey, let's just keep the cities to sprawl. Let's keep the sprawl effect going and continue to build single family homes in more and more cornfields, right? Keep doing the whole kind of green infill, old school development process like we have, which to your point, it's just not possible, right? It's no longer feasible. We've kind of met the useful life of that development process. So what do you think the like actionable items are, and what was laid out in the zero carbon aligned housing report for us to actually go out and do, as far as really looking at how do we meet these goals by 2050?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, what you're asking for, I mean, basically would be a total mind shift of our culture. So, hey, let's not be capitalistic anymore. Okay, light switch. We're not, we're not developing because there's money involved. We're developing for the social good. And so, I mean, I think that would be a massive switch, and that would solve it, right? Because we would be thinking about, we can't have the sprawl, and why can't we have the sprawl? And that would be a great conversation to have, but it's not reality. When we look at and what the report and what the national labs and the DOE put together is basically a zero carbon line building is saying that there's 4 kind of pillars for that. There has no on-site fossil fuel use, efficient energy use, drawing little to no electricity, and reduce heating and cooling needs. Heating and cooling represent a massive amount of energy needs. So then all the energy used comes from sustainable sources, and then there is a reduced grid impact. So if it has those 4 things, and there's more detail around all those, I'm just totally simplifying them for the purpose of this conversation. But if you have those four things, then that means meets zero carbon aligned. Well, you'd think I feel like, and I don't think I'm being Pollyannish, that those four things could be relatively easily achieved with any new construction that we have. Going to retrofits is a different story because each building is, a different age. It's in a different geographic location. It has different needs, and has different systems in place. So retrofitting is a whole another ball of wax. But for new construction, I feel like that's super easy to achieve and pretty understandable and simplified for the industry to follow.
Yeah, no, it does. It sounds a lot easier than what I was thinking it would entail. Um, it's a little bit disappointing that they're not focused on this idea of how do we prevent the sprawl of cities. Do you think that, I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily a U.S. Department of Energy issue per se. I mean, of course, there's other departments that might be involved in this, or it might even, matter of fact, be at a city level. But how do you think, like, this policy and report affects, and maybe it doesn't at all, this idea of like the continued sprawl of cities and having things be a little bit more centralized and compact? Because like all the studies we've done is the more compact you can make and the more dense you can make housing, the more efficient it becomes, even without any changes. Like if we keep things at a status quo, if we are just more dense, we'll have more efficiency. Of course, doing these additional elements would help with that. But do you think that this policy or report will help create more density, or is purely focused on the actual construction?
So I think it will for a couple reasons. So people who are, so there's literal interpretation of the report, but then there's also what are the solutions that would achieve what the report represents. And some of those solutions would be, I was on the phone with somebody yesterday who was talking about, I think it's heat.org, who's talking about doing geothermal banking and being able to transfer power heating to another building, who's just in the same community network as another building. So there are so many different ways to think about that. Solar is doing the same thing. So there are different communities where that are supported by the local utilities, where you can bank energy and the energy goes to whoever needs it in that moment. So if you are building densely and you are thinking through those design elements and those sort of infrastructure elements from the beginning of the design, that helps you achieve those four portions of the zero carbon aligned factor, and then also helps us think about eliminating sprawl. So it is a solution that could be achieved through some of the findings of the report, but it's not. I don't think anything in the report actually went into eliminating sprawl or reducing sprawl. But certainly it would be a good solution to achieve some of the goals that the report outlines.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I mean, it's great that we're even doing something, right? Something's better than nothing, and you can always make things better. But I'm glad to see that we're doing something towards the goal. This kind of pertains to this subject, but it's a little bit off on a tangent here. But you wrote another article that was titled "Data Predicts Future Housing Climate Risks and Ways to Lower Costs," which I think pertains to a lot of kind of what we've been seeing, especially as of recently with all the hurricanes down in the southeast. And I think you were writing a lot about the cost in regards to insurance costs for all of these kind of natural disaster events that have happened. How do you kind of see this changing our real estate decision making of where we're living and what we're building in those areas?
That's fun. So I've asked a lot of people that question and they avoid it. um, so it's something that I think it's still evolving, right? So I think, first of all, we're putting in this kind of new layer of transparency, and that's going to be game changing. we're giving not only consumers, homeowners information that they haven't had before to be smarter about where they live and how the risks inherent with where they live, or where they're going to move per se, but we're also giving that data to the industry at large. So now banks and insurance companies are looking at some of this information, and insurance companies are going, no way. We will lose our shirts if we're in that area of the country. Or premiums have already gone up, and I've seen lots of different numbers, but let's say 80% in the last 6 years. It's insane the amount that premiums have gone up. Insurers are leaving the state of Florida because they can no longer be there. There are housing developments in Colorado that have actually been stopped, and they cannot get permitting because they cannot get water to those areas. Because water in some areas of the country, like parts of Colorado, there are droughts, and there are things that so it's a natural resource that we now have to consider when we're thinking about building, developing, getting permits. But when we have access and transparency to some of that information, it's going to change. It's going to rewrite real estate. So people will be thinking about leaving their properties should they be in a dangerous area or not be able to get insurance. There are going to be different migration patterns. Insurance is going to have to come up with new ways to insure properties that includes or doesn't include massive climate events. It will mean that more places, people will have to migrate to safer, less risky spots. Developers will have to exit projects, just like I was talking about in Colorado, or leave areas that are dangerous or prone to climate threats. You've seen, I think, on some of the eastern shores, whole homes that are just falling into the water. And people still want to live in some of those places, but now that they have access to this information, will they be smarter about it? I'm pretty much guarantee yes.
And what information are you talking about that they're going to have access to?
Yeah, so both National Association of Realtors. So if you go to realtor.com, or if you go to Zillow.com, First Street partnered with both of those organizations. So when you're looking for a home, you now can see the climate threat for that particular property over a 30-year time frame. So you can actually, like, I've looked up my own home on both of those platforms. I live in Cincinnati, Ohio, so I don't have a lot of threats. Smart choice. But there are, if you look at a property in Florida, you can see it might have extreme heat threats. It might have hurricane wind threats. It might have flooding. So then you can look at it and you can be more informed about how you're going to position yourself, what insurance you're going to look at. A lot of people didn't know that they needed flood insurance. And so it might make them smarter in terms of just what they purchase as part of their home insurance.
Yeah. Yeah, I read that in your article. You did like an example of this Fort Lauderdale condo, and it was like crazy because each one, I think, had like a 10 out of 10, like wind risk and then heat risk and then hurricane prone risk. And it's like, at what point do you decide just to not live in Fort Lauderdale? And yeah, maybe not move to Cincinnati because, it's a lot colder there, or Wisconsin where we are, but maybe move up to like Alabama or, yeah, I mean, even South Carolina probably still has a lot of risks. But I definitely think it's going to affect the migration from and out of these states into other states quite soon, if it's not already happening. I mean, I think with this last big hurricane, it's probably already happening.
Yeah, for sure.
One thing I really wanted to talk about, which maybe we can spend a lot of time on, because we're actually in discussions about doing something like this with a few people, and it's the topic of Agrihoods, which maybe for those out there that don't know what an Agrihood is, it's not a word. Actually, I don't think it's a word. Maybe it's a word. But but could you define what an Agrihood is?
Yeah, and I pronounce a little bit different than your Wisconsin Canadian accent, I think. um, uh, I call it Agrihood, but it's basically the agriculture, and then hood is a neighborhood. So it's the two terms married together. And it many times it's a community of homes, and they're surrounding some sort of agricultural feature, where you can grow things for people to eat and consume. So it is a community feature and benefit.
And so, just so I understand, because I think it's what we're developing, but I want to double check. It's like basically you have some sort of farm or vegetable garden, or maybe if you're really adventurous, you have like a cattle ranch inside of a neighborhood. And so it's basically you're living with your food source.
That's right. Yep.
Interesting. And how do you think that, like, one, do you think that's a good idea? Two, if it is a good idea, how do you think it affects people's lives?
So I love it, honestly. I mean, and if you look at some of the examples of some of the Agrihoods across the country, it's it's had a very positive influence. And it's not only, the health and wellness factor of it, which is having fresh farm to table food, is a great aspect, but it's kind of secondary to the socialization part of it. So when you're in a community and you have the farming as a central aspect, people are going to farm together. It becomes a community joint activity on a regular basis where you're meeting and talking to your neighbors. You have a shared common goal and objective. And then you're also contributing to each other's health and well-being. So, I mean, it's obviously, something that can have a very powerful influence for the people who are involved in the activity. So, certainly, in Agrihood, it takes up part of the land, but it's a central feature that has so many positive benefits that it is definitely worthwhile. And I think, like I said before, the social aspect is the number one benefit.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. My wife and I actually stayed at this spot called Flora Farms, uh, down in Mexico on the Baja. And it was like this total, it sounds exactly like what you're talking about, where you have like your agriculture, you're growing food basically like right out front of your doorstep. And then basically every day you would like go out and pick fresh fruits and vegetables. And then you would come inside and cook your breakfast or lunch or dinner with the fruit that you had picked. And like Mexico was a great spot for it because you can grow a ton of things year round.
Yeah.
But yeah, how do you see that applying to like a cold climate? Like, I mean, even Ohio is pretty cold, but up here, obviously in Wisconsin, further north is even colder. How do you see that happening in like the winter? Do you think it's just like there's a period of time where you don't do any farming? Just like, of course, the farms around here don't. Or do you have like some sort of greenhouse incorporated into your design so that you can kind of have your Agrihood year round?
Yeah, I mean, I think that both are good solutions. Now, of course, all of it has to have cost benefit analysis. So, like, if you're a developer, I think most developers are doing these Agrihoods in a southern portion of the Sunshine States or something, um, where they can be more beneficial for longer periods of the year. Because once you start thinking about the greenhouse and the maintenance of that and such, I think that the costs maybe outweigh some of the benefits or outweigh what people are ready to pay for and spend without knowing or understanding. These are just some of the things that we've been talking about today that, people need to be better educated about before they're going to invest in. So they need to see one, their friends or family benefiting from something like this. They need to see case studies. They need to see social experiments. They need to see best practices or case studies that convince them that it's something that they should do with their own welfare. So it's something that it's powerful, but it needs peer pressure probably for people to invest in. And it this is what happened kind of with the sustainability stuff, and it's still happening, honestly. People don't know whether, when, and how they should convert to a heat pump, or if they should start with geothermal or something like that. They need to have some sort of external pressure, and typically it's around having dollar figures associated with it, because just having somebody tell them doesn't have the meaning that it does to their pocketbook.
Yeah, I mean, how do you think we incentivize that, both from us being like the developer, right? And a lot of our stuff is for rent housing. So it might be maybe a little bit more challenging to do it on the for rent side. But let's just say there's a residential housing developer listening, which I actually know one that's listening. And how do you think you do it both on the residential and for rent side of incentivizing people to maybe be willing to pay a little bit extra for the sustainability aspects of the project, or what we're talking about here with the agricultural aspects of the project?
Yeah, so what I think it comes down to is kind of where we open our conversation, which is you're creating a place for the health and well-being of your family. And if we can get more data to prove that your home has an impact on your medical bills, how many times you visit the doctor, how many times, the when people we're dealing with an aging population. So aging population, a lot of people are lonely, and loneliness has really, really negative health impacts. If we can start talking to people about taking care of themselves and putting themselves in the place of an Agrihood community where they can socialize and not feel so isolated, then we can show them that when people do that, I'm going to make this up, but they move from 10 doctor visits a year to one doctor visit a year. When we can actually have data that shows them these things, and then also show them, okay, here's what you would have spent in medical bills. This is what you're spending for the Agrihood. Look at this. It's a no-brainer. And plus you have this family, this community that is surrounding you, who are going to be lifelong friends. And, there's really kind of no price tag on that. And I'm not trying to be cheesy, but these are real things. These are real things and real consequences that people should be considering, and we have to spotlight them, and we have to, as an industry, be smart enough to tease out these data points and show them and share them and convince people and show them what's important, and have them take those factors into consideration when they're making these choices. And then once we start doing that, then the rest of what we develop can follow those patterns, and we'll be able to scale things that are better for the environment, for the communities, for the people living in them.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's kind of innocuous to this idea of replacement cost that we see a lot in business, where you have this old kind of rusty vehicle, right, or tool, and you have to replace it with a new one. And hopefully the new one is better. And maybe in the instance of a vehicle, maybe your new vehicle has way better mileage, right? You're getting maybe 50 miles to the gallon instead of 10 miles to the gallon. And it seems to me like you're saying we have to show the customer the same thing. Like if they're paying right now, or maybe spending the amount of time at the doctor's office, right? Maybe they spend 100 hours a year at the doctor's office. Well, could that be reduced to 10 hours a year if you're living in a better building with better air quality, with more access to outdoors, with more community? But it needs to be shown. Like you can't just say, hey, it's going to have, like, this car has 50 miles to the gallon, but you don't have any tests or data to show that. You need data to show, hey, my engine produces 50 miles to the gallon instead of 10 miles to the gallon. And it seems to me like what you're saying is we need to do the same thing with developments. But how do we fill the gap in the interim? Like, how do we get between where we are today to that place?
Yeah, I think I don't know if I have the answer for that, but I think that For us as an industry, we just have to open our eyes to these things. We have to be more willing to share, because I think a lot of people feel like they have something that's proprietary and that's making them unique and that's their value proposition. Well, that's all well and good, but in if you have something that's special and unique and that will help our industry um, perform better, we need to all be taking steps in that direction and sharing information as much as possible. Um, so I think that would be my message. And I think, I come across so many people on a daily basis and a weekly basis and ask them questions, and I'm filled with curiosity, and some people are just open books and they want to share and they want to change, not only themselves, but they want to be a positive force for the industry. And I think that's the mentality we have to take, and we have to have, get rid of a fixed mindset, and then, be willing to break down so that we can have a breakthrough. So all those things, I don't know. It's just we can't keep performing the way that we have been. We, as an industry, it's like the definition of insanity, right? You just we know how to build a house, and we keep building them the same way, and we're in this housing crisis where we keep building the same way. So like, so I think, I'm kind of rambling now, but I do think it's just going to take a more open mindset for everybody in the industry, and just to welcome new thoughts and support each other so that we can scale the new innovation and get rid of old practices.
Do you think there's any, like in your research or articles that you've written, any government incentives that can kind of fill that gap that maybe the markets and economy is not, because the business case isn't there yet to say, hey, if you build this way, you'll achieve X percentage higher rents, or you'll get a higher price for a single family home sale? Like, is there anything from your research that you've done that would say like, hey, U.S. federal government or state governments are stepping in to help kind of fill the interim gap?
Yeah, so kind of a tough one, because we're seeing headlines right now, right? That the Inflation Reduction Act might be pulled, and and there's state incentives, and hopefully those all stay in place. And but when you asked specifically about the writing that I've done, and there was I have an example here that I'd want to share. That Dandelion Energy is a company that is a startup, and it's operating on the East Coast in several states. And on the East Coast, there's a lot of homes that operate on propane or pellet heat, and they were never connected to the gas grid. And so what Dandelion is trying to do is convert them to geothermal heat pumps. And so the typical single pump system for what in that area is about average is a 2,000 square foot home that costs that heat pump system would cost about $40,000. And that's the retail price. And there are big savings that can be had with that. First, there's incentives from the state and local governments, which layer on to long-term, like operational savings. So the incentives and rebates could lower the cost nearly in half to about $21,000. And then with the costs of heating and cooling in the area, which are very expensive for that pellet heat, the homeowners can save up to 80% on heating and about 30% on cooling, while helping that all of that, the new system in place would reduce carbon emissions by also up to 80%. And so the homeowner can benefit, but so does the environment. So with that Inflation Reduction Act, the homeowner and the third-party installer can also both receive the 30% tax credit for 10 years. And then the IRA also offers the domestic manufacturer rebate for another 10%. So the third party would get up to 40% credit. So there's a lot of things that are out there currently that we can take advantage of. But you have to either know the system, or you have to get in and inform yourself. So the United States Department of Energy has tons, just a massive amount of resources on their site to help people through this. Doesn't necessarily make it easy, but it's all there. And like I said, going through that example in particular, that's a crazy amount of savings, right? And it's also beneficial in so many different ways.
Yeah, just to clarify your example, so the traditional cost would be $40,000 for this geothermal heat pump system. The manufacturer is discounting it by 50%, roughly,
By yeah,
by 20%.
40.
Oh, 40%. Wow. And what's their incentive to discount by 40%?
So sorry, let's back up a bit. So when it's all said and done, you're getting about a 50% rebate on the system, and then you're saving on heating and cooling, and then there are rebates that would go on over a 10-year period. So you're saying 50% from the manufacturer. That is not actually where the rebate's coming from. The rebate is coming from government incentives.
Okay. Because yeah, we're getting the 30 plus the 10, which is Section 48 of the new IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. Like we're getting that on our geothermal systems for all of our buildings, which is a tax credit, which is nice because that is a 1-for-1. Basically, if you have $1 of tax liability owed to the federal government and you get this tax credit for installing geothermal, now you owe $0. And it's 30% if you don't source domestic, but if you source domestic, you get a bump to 40, like you said. But then where's the additional 10% coming from? Is that an additional credit, or is that from the manufacturer that they're just
domestic manufacturer rebate? Yeah.
Interesting.
So
Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. Yeah, so basically you're getting a heat pump system for a 50% discount. I mean, assuming you can use the tax credit. Wow. Yeah, I mean, we're doing it on the commercial side, but I think for a lot of homeowners, it would make a lot of sense for them to use.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. What was the title of that paper? Because I'll link it in the show notes. The one that you talk about the economic incentives.
That is a good question. That is a Forbes article that I wrote about Dandelion Energy, so I can share that for sure.
Yeah, you can send it to me. I'll link it in the show notes. I know we're almost up on time, but was there anything else you wanted to cover in our discussion?
That's a good question. I think that, personally, I was very invested in a project that we did with Build Exact and the ABC Collaborative, the Advanced Building Construction, which is through that report, the retrofit report. And I would say that report is just an incredible resource for everybody in the industry. So I definitely would say use that. And then we did a retrofit design tool in collaboration with ABC. And basically, it takes a homeowner or a contractor through about 12 questions, which would tell them exactly what needs to happen not exactly, sorry. It would give them highlights of what needs to happen to an exact property based on its geographic location and the zone, the climate zone that it's in, and the age of the property, the insulation, so on and so forth, based on those 12 questions, then tell you what you need to do to upgrade to get to zero carbon alignment. Then we took those things and with the help of the national labs, put them into assemblies. So, for instance, if you had to upgrade your building envelope, we put that into assemblies that would meet zero carbon aligned goals. And so like triple pane windows, whatever else it is, are rated value walls, and put those into assemblies that then would transport into Build Exact as a takeoff and estimating tool. So just helping ease the process and put people into exactly what they need without having to learn everything in each step of the process. So not having to go research, what does that mean for having this type of wall? Or what does this mean for this exactly climate zone? We were able to do that with the retrofit design tool, and people can use that to quickly and easily get to solutions and then get the rebates associated with those solutions.
Yeah. Wow, that's cool. What was that design tool called?
The retrofit design tool. So I can send you a link for that too.
Yeah, send me a link because I'll add it. And then if people want to check it out, there'll be a link in the show notes.
So,
If you're in the business or wanting to retrofit your own home, then you can quickly, it sounds like, do a quick analysis to see what you need to do. Does that give cost guidance as well, it sounds like?
yeah. So once you're in Build Exact, you have those assemblies. And then you can do you upload a takeoff or you do a takeoff of the property. So then you can put in the exact measurements and then you would get the cost estimates.
That's awesome. Well, I really appreciate you coming on the show, Jennifer. We will add those articles and the tool to the show notes, but appreciate our conversation today.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Nate. It's been an honor. And thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. At Neutral, we transcend the conventional notion of merely minimizing harm. We embrace a regenerative philosophy, seeking to create buildings that begin to contribute to the health of our planet. Each project we build gets us one step closer to this commitment, a living embodiment of practices that replenish and restore. We'd like to thank you for being part of this conversation. For more information, visit our website at neutral.us. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Neutral Podcast.